Let's turn now to Washington and the deepening Republican divide. Also, a new statement from the man at the center of it, former President Donald Trump. He's attempting to rebrand his consistent, let's call it a fantasy, that he won the 2020 election. He wrote this: "The fraudulent presidential election of 2020 will be, from this day forth, be known as the big lie."
That is a glaring example of Orwellian doublespeak. And soon after that statement, one of former president's biggest Republican critics, Congressman Liz Cheney, sent this tweet, quote, "The 2020 presidential election was not stolen. Anyone who claims it was is spreading the big lie, turning their back on the rule of law and poisoning our democratic system." Cheney sending out that tweet despite the fact that she is facing major criticism from within her own party. A senior House Republican tells CNN that Cheney may not survive the month in her leadership role. Let's bring in CNN Chief Congressional Correspondent Manu Raju. He's on Capitol Hill. So Manu, let's start there. The Republicans, as we all remember, in, I think, February, tried to vote Cheney out of her post. They failed. Why do they think this time around it would work?
Well, what I'm hearing from a number of Republicans is the opposition to her is growing. Now, will they actually succeed in pushing her out of the position? That is still another question. Ultimately, if there is a vote, it would be a secret ballot vote, just like we saw in February. She won that easily. But this time, things are different. Frustration has been growing about her criticism of Donald Trump, particularly that came out during the Republican retreat from last week. Some Republicans contended her comments were a distraction as the party was trying to unify. She was responding to reporters' questions at the time. And also a key point here that Kevin McCarthy, the House Republican leader, has not offered any defense of her whatsoever. That was different than February. While he was mum talking about her going into that closed-door conference meeting, he ultimately came to her defense and gave her a speech in her defense that a number of Republicans came out and said it was a rousing speech, helped unify the conference in a lot of ways, but he's not giving any indication he will do that again. And under the rules of the House Republican Conference, he can call an election almost immediately. The next time they meet is next week. Will he do so then? It is possible. And you're hearing concerns from different quarters of the Republican Party. I talked to one McCarthy ally, Jim Banks. He chairs an influential caucus called the Republican Study Committee within the larger House Republican Conference. And he told me, "I would like to see my friend Liz join the focus and share the mission to regain the majority. She seems very, very focused on the past and tearing down other Republicans like myself." His criticism stemming in part from her going after what was his proposal about how the Republicans could regain the majority. But nevertheless, you're seeing this tension really build within the conference. Can she survive this? Can she make it past this month? An open question, but a lot of questions coming on is being directed at the Republican leader himself, Kevin McCarthy, and will he stand by his number 3 in his leadership team?
All right, let's answer that now. Manu Raju on Capitol Hill for us. Thank you. Let's bring in former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman. Congressman, good to have you. Let's start with Representative Cheney. As Manu mentioned there, she survived, more than survived. I mean, the vote was with a significant margin, this first attempt to unseat her in leadership. Do you think she could survive again?
I think she would. I think you'd have to turn 30, 40 votes there, and some people would not have to show up. Because, you know, that sometimes happens, Victor, when people don't want to be part of this. They just forget to be there that day. But, I mean, they'd have to probably turn 30 to 40 votes. So this looks like a coordinated effort from leadership to start this conversation and try to turn the tide to actually push Liz out. And I think a lot of it has to do with the 2022 midterms. And the fact is that Stop the Steal, based on using election integrity terminology, is polling so well right now.
So you say that this is part of an attempt to push Congresswoman Cheney out. The last time the minority leader spoke on her behalf to support her, you don't think that he would be in that position again if he decides to call the vote next week?
I think it's difficult if he's listening to his caucus leads, like the RSC. I was in the RSC, or if you're listening to the Freedom Caucus, who just had a fundraiser down in Mar-a-Lago with President Trump, and I don't think people really are aware of that, is that this is the push that you're seeing, is that it's President Trump who's trying to sort of tear the party apart or remake it back until he needs it to be in order for him to run again in 24 and for his candidates to win. So really the issue is that this big lie, and that is that the election was stolen, is being pushed by President Trump because he thinks that's his way back into the White House, honestly. And when you look at a lot of the districts, Victor, their polling, again, is very, very specific towards the big lie and towards election integrity. And the fact is, most Republicans at the grassroots level still believe the election was illegitimate.
And let's talk about that, because a lot of Republicans, congressmen, have sloshed around in this space of President Biden has effectively, legally been elected, right? That he is indeed the duly elected president of the United States, but there were problems in the 2020 election that must be fixed, although there was no evidence of widespread election fraud. The former president now is not satisfied with that. He wants them not only to buy the big lie that there was election fraud, but sell it.
Well, it works here in Virginia. If you look at the gubernatorial campaign here, every single candidate has talked about election integrity commissions. And that's the sad part, Victor, is we can't even talk about, real policies right now because election integrity is a cover for Stop the Steal right now throughout the country. And the issue with people like me is that we just don't fit in an ideological bucket. And if we don't actually check every tick off that ideological checklist, we're thrown out of the tribe. And I'm okay being tribalist. I think Liz is having that issue right now, and a lot of these individuals. But I'm used to this. When I was younger, I got kicked out of my friend's basement because I didn't like Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm okay being without this tribe and this fantasy that the election was stolen. But again, and I keep stressing this, 2022 is looking pretty good for the GOP. And this election integrity stop the steal messaging is going to work. And I'm just having a tough time getting that across to people that the GOP is far from dead, especially with this messaging where people think that fantasy or this good against evil messianic thing that's going on right now is what they need to vote for. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that Joe Biden is believed to be illegitimate by a large portion of the Republican base.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with my producer. You brought up the question of a legislative argument. Republicans just wrapped up their GOP legislative retreat in Orlando, and instead of coming out coalescing around an argument, a policy argument, they're arguing about the former president. And let's put this up, because I think it's important people remember the 2020 RNC at the party platform. Instead of, although it's a mundane document, instead of voting on a policy platform, what they came out of the RNC was that the Republican Party has and will continue to enthusiastically support the president's America First agenda. Essentially, whatever you like.
Well, this is the party of one person, not a party of policy. And if we don't have a party, if the GOP doesn't have a message that is people over party, I think they're in big trouble way down the line, though, Victor, in the future. I'd say 8 to 10 years. But right now, President Trump has so much sway in the party that it's still effective for these individuals to say, hey, anything President Trump says, I'm going to do that. And here's my problem. I'm not a fan of bullies, and I'm not a fan of those who are sycophants. I think that's the issue with elected individuals today, is they think, that the path to riches goes through Mar-a-Lago. And I don't want to be part of that kind of line down there. And I'm certain that this pilgrimage most people are taking is still based on the fact they think that the money line is where they need to be. And this all goes back to follow the money. I've told people we can talk about fantasy and ideological craziness. We can talk about the fact that some people actually believe this. But this is a follow the money thing, and it's one of the biggest conspiratorial grifts I think we've ever seen, and it continues today.
So let's talk about leadership, and I want to just first play what we've heard over the last 4 months from the House Minority Leader, Kevin McCarthy, and Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell.
President Trump won this election, so everyone who's listening, do not be quiet.
The president bears responsibility for Wednesday's attack on Congress by mob rioters.
Do you believe that former President Trump provoked?
I don't believe he provoked if you listen to what he said at the rally.
President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it.
If the president was the party's nominee, would you support him?
Of the nominee of the party, absolutely.
Now, if that's leadership, and you believe that there is an effort now to push Liz Cheney out of leadership, what is your degree of hope for the future of the Republican Party?
My degree of hope for, I guess, ideological consistency or being a party that supports the people, not individuals or polling, is a little bleak right now. And again, when you hear individuals talk, whether it's the leader of the Senate or the leader of the House, they're leading from the fact from behind on polling. They're trying to look at the polling in the districts and where the money is coming from. And when you have Marjorie Taylor Greene raising $3.2 million, Victor, it's very difficult to push back against that, seeing where those money lines are coming from, especially grassroots fundraising at the small donor level. So this is all about it, and again, I think maybe it's why I wasn't that popular in some parts of the political club, just like when I was kicked out of that Dungeons and Dragons basement, is that I just cannot stand not talking about truth and facts at this point. And I have this ability to do that. I think some of us do, but it does mean we're facts-based pariahs. We are the radicals in the Republican Party now, and I'm happy to be that. If it's based on facts and it's based on policy, I'm happy to be that pariah, and I'm happy to be that sort of, I guess, radical or maverick that the parties need. And that does apply to Liz, it applies to Adam and Pete and a lot of people that are screaming about this.
Former Republican Congressman Denver Riggleman, thank you so much, sir.